I froze when the finger I was using to trace a crack in the plaster suddenly slipped into emptiness. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst came a second later, when something on the other side, from within the darkness of the wall, carefully yet insistently touched the pad of my finger in response. It was warm. And damp. I jerked my hand back, scraping the skin on the brick, and in the absolute silence of the apartment I heard someone behind the wall exhale quickly and softly. This happened 2 years ago. I sold that apartment for next to nothing just to get rid of it, but even now, in my new home, I sleep only with a nightlight on. If you think the walls of your house protect you, you're wrong. Sometimes walls are just a screen, and someone is standing behind it, waiting. It all began with a smell. I bought that 2-room apartment in an old building, seduced by the high ceilings and thick brick walls. The realtor called it Old City Charm. I saw only the hell of a full renovation ahead. The place was wrecked, creaking parquet floors, layers of paint on the doors like the rings of a tree trunk, and wallpaper. God, the wallpaper, how much of it there was. For the first week I worked there in the evenings after the office. It was exhausting, but in a strange way meditative. You take a putty knife, pry up an edge, pull, and with a dry tearing sound peel away a layer of history. Vinyl wallpaper from the 90s. Beneath it, faded paper flowers from the 80s. Deeper still, something blue and geometric from the 60s. And at the very bottom, newspapers. They'd pasted newspapers directly onto the concrete or wooden lath to level the surface. Yellowed, brittle sheets dated 1954. I read headlines about milk yields and party congresses as I scraped them off, breathing in decades-old dust. It was the dust that was the first strange thing. Construction dust usually smells of lime, cement, dry earth. But when I reached the load-bearing wall in the bedroom, something else crept out from under the blade. The smell was sweetish and heavy. Like an old chest of clothes that hadn't been opened in 50 years. Or dried flowers forgotten inside a book. I didn't think much of it. Mask on, window wide open, keep working. It was around 1 in the morning when I hit that spot. The wall separating my bedroom from the neighboring apartment was supposed to be solid brick, at least half a meter thick. I was peeling off stubborn newspapers when the sound changed. Scrape scrape. Scrape scrape. And then, thump. The sound turned hollow. I tapped the handle of the putty knife against it. Instead of the dull knock of solid brick, it echoed, as if I were tapping plywood hiding a huge room behind it. What the hell, I whispered. According to the floor plan, this was a solid wall. I brought my flashlight closer. Beneath the newspapers, the plaster was cracked into a fine web, forming an almost perfect rectangle the size of a doorway, only clumsily sealed, hastily filled in. Curiosity beat fatigue. I grabbed a hammer and chisel. I needed to know whether the whole wall would collapse if I started cutting channels for wiring. I struck the center of the hollow patch. A large piece of plaster fell away, revealing not brick but wooden lath and a black void between the slats. A rush of cold air blasted out. The draft was so strong that the flame of the lighter I held up went out instantly. And with the air came that same sweet smell, now concentrated, nauseatingly thick. I shone the flashlight inside. The beam caught only dust dancing in the air before vanishing into darkness. There was space behind the wall. Not just a gap between bricks, but a cavity at least a meter deep. Hello? I shouted into the hole, expecting angry neighbors. Silence. Only the soft hiss of falling sand. I decided it must be some old ventilation shaft or technical cavity the architects had forgotten. I taped the hole over with masking tape, planning to deal with it in the morning, packed up my tools, and drove back to the rental where I was living at the time. That night I couldn't sleep. I had an irrational, sticky feeling that I'd left the door to my new apartment open, even though I knew I'd locked it with both locks. The next day I came back to continue. I planned to work late, so I brought a folding cot, a kettle, and a sleeping bag. I decided to spend the night there to save time. That was a mistake. Around 2 in the morning I woke up. In an empty apartment without furniture, every sound is amplified. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling where shadows from tree branches outside danced in the glow of streetlights. The sound was coming from that same wall. SCRRR. SCRRR. A quiet, rhythmic sound. Like someone dragging a dry palm across wallpaper. But there was no wallpaper anymore, only bare concrete and my masking tape. I held my breath. Rats, maybe? In old buildings, rats in the ceilings are nothing unusual. The sound stopped. I turned onto my side, trying to get comfortable on the squeaky cot. Then I heard it again. But now it was different. It wasn't a rustle. It was a whisper. So quiet the words blended into a monotone murmur, like water moving through pipes. But the intonation was human. Someone was speaking quickly, breathlessly, as if complaining or arguing. I sat up, goosebumps racing down my back. "Who's there?" My voice shook. The whisper stopped instantly. I stood up, turned on my phone flashlight, and walked to the wall. The masking tape I'd used to seal the hole was hanging in tatters. It hadn't peeled off from the top under its own weight. It had been bent outward, as if blown by a powerful gust of air, or pushed from inside. I moved closer. Cold air poured from the gap like from an air conditioner. I pressed my ear to the wall, careful not to touch the opening. Silence. Thick, padded silence. "Neighbors," I muttered, trying to calm myself. "Just good acoustics." I sealed the hole again, this time with 3 layers of tape. Then I shoved heavy bags of plaster against the wall, barricading the suspicious spot. I spent the rest of the night with the lights on, headphones on my ears, podcasts blasting at full volume. By morning I'd convinced myself it was exhaustion and nerves. Old building, drafts, acoustics. Nothing mystical. During the day my friend Lyoka came by to help with the wiring. I showed him the hole. "Creepy stuff," he said, shining a powerful work light inside. "Listen, it's really deep in there. That's not a vent shaft. Look, there's a floor." I peered over his shoulder. The beam dropped down and picked out wooden boards. "It's a niche," Lyoka concluded. "Happens in old buildings. A mother-in-law room or a storage space previous tenants bricked up to even out the wall. Want to open it up? You could make a walk-in closet." The idea was tempting. A couple of extra square meters downtown don't come along every day. We grabbed a sledgehammer. The wall gave easily, it was lath and plaster, not load-bearing brick. In half an hour we'd broken through an opening you could squeeze through sideways. The smell hit us so hard Lyoka started coughing and stepped back. Jesus, did something die in there? It wasn't the smell of decay. It was the smell of life, but old, rotten life. The stench of an unwashed body, stale food, and that same sweet dust. We waited for it to air out. Lyoka shone his light inside. "Holy hell," he whistled. "This isn't a storage room." It was a narrow corridor, barely 70 centimeters wide, running parallel to my bedroom. Judging by everything, it was a servant's passage designed before the revolution, later bricked up on both ends during Soviet times when the large apartment was split into smaller ones. "I'll crawl in and take a look," Lyoka said, putting on a respirator. He squeezed through. I stayed outside, holding the flashlight. "What do you see?" "It's tight. Long corridor. Dead end at the far side, brickwork. Looks like the exit to the stairwell was sealed off completely." He took a few steps, his boots thudded hollowly on the boards inside the wall. "Hey, there's something here," his voice sounded muffled, like from inside a barrel. "There's a chair." "A chair?" "Yeah, Just a regular wooden one, Soviet era. And, damn, the wallpaper's torn up. He went quiet. I heard his hand moving along the wall. Sasha, you're not going to like this. What? The whole wall's scratched up. Deep scratches. Like someone dug at it with a knife, or fingernails. And they're all around the spot where we broke through. From the inside. Cold washed over me. Get out of there, Lyak. Wait, there's something else on the chair. Some kind of rag, and a notebook. At that moment the light in my apartment flickered. The bulb hanging from a temporary socket buzzed and went out. We were plunged into darkness, broken only by the beam of Lyoka's flashlight inside the wall. Lyoka, get out. I shouted. I'm coming, damn it, I'm snagged. I heard fabric tearing, then the crash of the chair falling. Lyoka swore. And then I heard it. From deep inside that corridor, from the end Lyoka had called a dead end, came a rapid, slapping sound. Like bare feet running on wood. Thump 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 thump. Lyoka, behind you. I screamed, not even understanding what I was yelling. Lyoka practically spilled out of the opening into my room, white as chalk, covered in dust and cobwebs. We both jumped back toward the window, our flashlights trained on the black hole in the wall. Silence. You heard that, right? I asked, gasping. There was nobody there, Lyoka whispered. I was shining the light at the end. There's a wall. Solid wall. But the sound, it came from there. We stood like that for 5 minutes, staring at the opening. No one came out. Nothing appeared. We need to seal it, Lyoka said firmly. Right now. Brick it up. I've got foam and a couple of blocks in the car. We'll slap it together, you can plaster it later. We worked like possessed men. We stuffed the opening with chunks of brick we'd knocked out, filled everything with expanding foam, and screwed a sheet of drywall over it. When we finished, Lyoka left, refusing even a cup of tea. He looked shaken. I didn't want to stay either, but I needed to close the windows and gather my tools. I hurriedly packed screwdrivers into a box, trying not to look at the fresh patch on the wall. One thought kept looping in my head, there couldn't have been anyone there. It's a sealed space. Stale air, no ventilation. No one could live there. I was already putting on my jacket when I noticed the notebook. Lyoka had dropped it when he climbed out. It was an old-school notebook with a green cover, swollen from dampness, lying on the floor open in the middle. I shouldn't have touched it. I should have left. But I picked it up. The pages were filled with writing in an indelible pencil. The handwriting was sharp and jerky, pressed hard into the paper. The letters jumped and overlapped. I read a random page. They think I left. I didn't leave. I became quiet. I learned not to breathe when they listen. The walls are warm. I hear them eat, hear them sleep, hear them argue. Today the man in apartment 34 beat his wife. I scratched the wall so he would stop. He stopped. Now he listens to me. I like it when they listen. I turned the page. The date was recent. Just a month ago. New tenants in 32. Loud. Tearing the skin off my walls. Shining light in my eyes. I will hide in the far corner. If they open the door, I will go in. I want to sleep in a soft bed. It's cold here. Apartment 32. My apartment. The cold didn't run down my spine, it hit somewhere deeper, in my stomach. The notebook slipped from my hands. So someone had been there. All that time. While I was tearing off wallpaper. While I slept there on the folding cot. He was standing behind a thin partition, listening to my breathing. And we had just sealed him back inside? Or I slowly raised my eyes to the wall. The sheet of drywall we'd screwed in place 10 minutes earlier was vibrating slightly. Scrape. Scrape. The sound wasn't coming from inside. I understood it with horrifying clarity. It wasn't coming from the room we'd sealed. It was coming from the ceiling. From the ventilation grill above my head. The corridor behind the wall hadn't been isolated. It connected to the building's ventilation shafts. When we started breaking the wall, we scared the tenant. And he didn't stay to be bricked in. He went up. Into the ventilation system. I looked up. Two eyes stared down at me from the dark grill under the ceiling. In the glow of the streetlight they glistened with a wet, yellowish shine. And I saw fingers. Long, dust-gray fingers gripping the grill from the inside. "You opened the door for me," a voice rasped from above. It wasn't a whisper. It was the voice of someone who had forgotten how to speak loudly. "Thank you." The grill clanged to the floor. From the black square something began to lower itself. Something long, thin, and unnaturally flexible. I don't remember how I ran out of the apartment. I left everything behind: tools, jacket, car keys. I ran down the stairs, leaping 3 steps at a time, hearing behind me, inside the apartment, the dull thud of bare feet hitting the floor. I stayed with friends that night. The next day I returned with the police. I told them I'd heard suspicious noises and thought squatters had broken in. We went inside in daylight. The apartment was empty. The drywall patch was intact. But the ventilation grill lay on the floor. The entire apartment was covered in barefoot prints. They were everywhere, on the dusty floor, on the windowsills, even on the walls. The prints were black with decades of soot from the shafts. But the worst was in the bedroom. My folding cot had been unfolded. The sleeping bag was crumpled, as if someone had slept in it. And on the pillow lay a small pile of old, dry bones. Chicken bones. Leftovers. Beside them was a note, scratched onto a piece of wallpaper with the same indelible pencil. "Cozy. I'm staying." I sold the apartment a month later to resellers, hiding what had happened. I know, it was vile. But I couldn't go back there. But do you know what scares me the most? Not that creature. Not the fact that it lived in the walls for years. What terrifies me is that yesterday, in my new apartment, in a completely different part of the city, I woke up in the middle of the night to a familiar sound. A rustling came from behind the wardrobe. And when I turned on the light, I saw on the floor by the baseboard a small pile of dust and a scrap of old, yellowed newspaper dated 1954. It didn't stay there. It moves, taking its favorite things with it. Good night. And check your ventilation before you go to sleep. I woke to a sound that can't be mistaken for anything else. Metal striking glass. I sat up in bed, blinking in the darkness, and my eyes landed on the wall opposite me. Moonlight spilled across the very drawing I had tried to paint over the day before. The figure drawn in charcoal, the same one, long and unnaturally thin, was no longer standing in the corner of the paper room. It was standing by the drawn door. And in its black, cross-hatched hand something gleamed that had not been drawn at all. It was my real apartment key. I reflexively slapped my hand onto the nightstand beside the bed. Empty. The cold metal of the key wasn't chilling my palm, it was chilling the paper skin of the thing on the wall. My name is Andre, and I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in curses. But I do believe what I saw with my own eyes. I left that apartment 3 months ago, abandoning everything inside, my belongings, my documents, even my clothes. And to this day, I'm afraid of the sound of a pencil scratching paper. Check that no one is drawing your fate while you sleep. It all started with a good deal. Too good, as I understand now. A 2-room apartment in an old building, high ceilings, thick brick walls, and a price nearly 40% below market. The realtor, a nervous man with darting eyes, mumbled something about an urgent move abroad by the owners and the need for cosmetic repairs. Cosmetic was putting it mildly. The apartment smelled of dampness, dust, and something Swedish, like old, dried glue. In the bedroom, the wallpaper was peeling off in entire sheets, hanging loose like strips of old skin. That very first evening, I decided to start stripping it down. I was full of enthusiasm. I bought a putty knife, a respirator, and turned on loud music to drown out the silence of the vast, echoing space. The wallpaper came off easily. Beneath the top dirty beige layer was another one, tiny blue flowers, popular in the 80s. Under that, Soviet newspapers from the 60s. I tore them away layer by layer, feeling like an archaeologist uncovering the history of someone else's life. And then, beneath the last layer of newspaper, I reached the plaster. But it wasn't bare. The entire wall opposite where I planned to put my bed was covered in drawings. These weren't a child's scribbles with markers. They had been made with something like charcoal or an extremely soft, greasy graphite pencil. The strokes were deep, pressed into the plaster with such force that the gypsum crumbled in places. I turned the music off. Silence flooded the room at once, dense and heavy. I stepped closer, lighting the wall with my phone's flashlight. The drawings were strange. It was a panorama of the room. The very room I was standing in. The window, the door, the high ceiling. But the proportions were distorted. The window looked too small, like a firing slit, while the door was enormous, stretching all the way to the ceiling. In the center of the drawn room stood a group of people. 3 smaller figures and one tall one, its head nearly touching the drawn chandelier. The tall figure had no face. In its place was a dense black spiral, twisted inward with manic precision. Whoever had drawn it pressed so hard that a small hole had formed in the center of the spiral. Curiosity won out over revulsion. Probably the previous tenant's kids fooling around, I thought, though looking at the figure's angular, broken limbs, the word fooling felt completely wrong. It was late. I decided I'd strip the plaster tomorrow. I just pushed the bed into the center of the room, away from the walls, and went to sleep. The smell of old paper and graphite dust hung in the air, tickling my nostrils. I woke up around 3 in the morning. A sound had woken me. Quiet, rhythmic, dry. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was coming from the wall with the drawings. Like a mouse gnawing inside the structure. I lay perfectly still, listening. Old buildings are full of sounds, pipes hum, floors creak, neighbors walk around. But this sound was different. It was deliberate. I turned on the night light. The sound stopped instantly. I got up and walked to the wall. The drawings were still there. The same warped proportions, the same figures. But something had changed. I couldn't immediately tell what. I stood there, staring at the black spiral where the tall figure's face should be. And then a chill washed over me. The night before, when I'd examined the drawing, the small, children figures had been standing in a line, holding hands. Now they were scattered around the drawn room. One figure was sitting in a corner, hugging its knees. Another looked as if it were trying to climb the wall. And the third was lying on the floor in an unnatural position. I blinked. "You're just tired, Andre," I said out loud. My voice sounded pathetic. "You didn't remember the details. It's just pareidolia. The brain filling in gaps." I went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. I lay with my back to the wall, pulling the blanket up to my chin. And 10 minutes later, the sound returned. Scratch, scratch. Now it was louder. And I could clearly hear not just scratching, but the sound of crumbling grit. As if someone, right now, in the dark, were pressing a pencil hard against the wall. The next morning, I decided to paint over the madness. I didn't wait for plasterers. I bought the thickest white primer I could find and a roller. In daylight, the drawings looked even more repulsive. The graphite seemed greasy, oily. When I ran my finger over it, a black, stubborn smear remained on my skin, smelling faintly of burnt rubber. I coated the wall with 2 layers. The white paint hid the black figures, the spirals, the distorted room. The wall became clean, pristinely white. I felt relief. The room immediately seemed brighter, the air fresher. I spent the rest of the day unpacking boxes. I arranged my books, assembled my desk, hung the curtains. The apartment began to look lived in. By evening, I was so tired I forgot about the night fears entirely. I fell asleep deeply, without dreams. But I woke again in darkness. And again, to a sound. This time it wasn't scratching. It was the sound of plaster falling. A fine, dry rain of sand and gypsum hitting the floor. I opened my eyes. The room was dark, the streetlight barely breaking through the new curtains. I looked at the wall. The primer hadn't dried. It had crumbled. Or rather, something had pushed it out from underneath. White flakes lay on the floor like dirty snow. And on the wall, black lines were bleeding through again. I turned on the ceiling light. My hands were shaking. The drawing had changed completely. The drawn room was now furnished. Details had appeared that weren't there before. A desk stood by the wall. Curtains hung on the window. Boxes sat on the floor. My stomach turned. The drawn furniture exactly matched mine. The same desk I'd assembled that afternoon. The same moving boxes with the delivery company's logo. The same curtains. The drawing wasn't showing the past. It was reflecting the present. But the worst part wasn't the furniture. The worst part was the figures. The small ones were gone. Only one remained, the tall one with the black spiral for a face. And it was no longer standing in the center. It was standing right at the head of the drawn bed. The bed on which a drawn person was lying. The person was sleeping on their side, knees pulled to their chest. It was my position. I backed toward the door, never taking my eyes off the wall. It felt as though if I looked away, the tall figure would step off the wall into the three-dimensional world. The graphite gleamed under the electric light, as if it were wet. I ran out of the apartment, grabbing only my keys and my phone. I spent the night in my car, parked in the neighboring courtyard. Every minute I looked up at the windows of my third-floor apartment. It was dark. But it felt as though a flat, black shadow stood behind the glass. The next day, I returned only in sunlight. Fear feels stupid in daylight, irrational. I convinced myself it was some kind of chemical effect. The primer reacting with old graphite, bringing it out. The furniture details, maybe I'd drawn them myself while sleepwalking. Stress from the move. Toxic paint fumes. I decided I needed proof. I set my laptop camera to record, aimed straight at the wall. If someone was walking around and drawing, I'd see it. If it was me, I'd see that too. I couldn't afford to move out. All my money had gone into the purchase. I had no choice. I had to beat the wall. All day I stripped paint and plaster down to the bare brick. I worked with a jackhammer, raising clouds of red dust. I destroyed the drawing physically. Smashed it, reduced it to rubble, carried it out in heavy bags. By evening, there was nothing left but rough, bare brickwork. No graphite. No figures. Just honest brick from 1905. I felt victorious. I drank a beer, ordered pizza, and went to bed with a sense of accomplishment. The wall was bare. There was nothing to draw on. I woke at 3 in the morning. The silence was ringing. I lay there, staring at the brick wall. It was clean, I smiled in the dark. I had one. And then I heard it. Scratch. The sound wasn't coming from the wall. It was coming from the floor. Very slowly, I leaned my head over the edge of the bed. The floor in my room was old parquet, which I'd covered with cheap light-colored linoleum to avoid refinishing it. On the pale linoleum, right beside my bed, black, greasy lines were appearing. They formed right before my eyes, as if an invisible hand were pressing invisible charcoal into the plastic with monstrous force. The line led from the wall. The thing hadn't disappeared with the plaster. It had moved to the floor. I watched the drawing take shape in real time. Stroke by stroke. First long, spider-like legs. Then the torso. The drawing wasn't flat, it had a warped perspective, creating the illusion of depth, as if it were a pit in the floor rather than a picture on the surface. But the most horrifying part was something else. The drawing was getting closer. The tall figure was drawn as if crawling across the floor toward my bed. Its arms, long, with too many joints, were reaching for the legs of my bed. I jumped up, planting my bare foot directly on the figure's head. The sensation was revolting. The linoleum there was icy and slick, as if smeared with fat. I leapt back toward the desk. My eyes darted around the room. Drawings were appearing everywhere. On the hallway wallpaper I hadn't yet stripped. On the wardrobe door. The room was filling with shadows that existed only in 2 dimensions, but their malice was fully 3-dimensional. I grabbed my phone. I had to leave. Now. I reached for the nightstand to grab my apartment keys. I always put them in the same place, next to the lamp. The nightstand was empty. Panic punched the air out of my lungs. I started pawing at the desk, knocking books and cups to the floor. The keys were gone. I turned to the wall, the brick wall I had cleaned. There was a drawing on it again. Charcoal lay directly on the uneven red surface, ignoring mortar lines and cracks. It was my hallway. The view from inside the apartment toward the front door. And by the door stood that same figure. The spiral in place of its face now looked like a vortex, swallowing light. One of its hands rested on the lock. And in the other, a real metal object was embedded in the drawing. My key. It wasn't drawn. It was inserted into the wall, into the drawn hand, held there against gravity, surrounded by black strokes that seemed to pulse, holding the prize in place. The figure on the wall was holding my only way out. "Give it back," I whispered. My voice broke into a shriek. "Give it back." I lunged at the wall, reaching for the key. My fingers touched metal. It was hot. Scalding. The moment I touched it, the drawing twitched. I swear the black lines on the brick shifted. The drawn hand clenched. I yanked at the key, but it wouldn't budge, as if welded to the wall. Then I heard a sound from the hallway. From the real hallway. Click. The sound of a lock opening. But not the front door. It was the bathroom lock, the one I'd turned the night before while showering. Creak. The bathroom door opened. I stood by the wall, gripping the burning key fused into the brick, staring into the dark hallway opening. On the wall before me, in the drawn world, the figure began to turn its head. The spiral unwound. And from the hallway came footsteps. Not human footsteps. It sounded like someone walking on their hands. The slap of palms against the floor. Fast, arrhythmic. Slap, slap, slap. It was getting closer. I understood then that I couldn't get the key. The drawing wasn't just an image. It was a map. And if the figure on the map was holding the key, then in reality it was holding the door. I let go of the key. I grabbed a heavy chair and swung it into the window with all my strength. The old glass shattered with a deafening crash. 3rd floor. Bushes and lawn below. I didn't think. I heard the slapping turn into a dry scrape right at the bedroom doorway. I didn't look back. I scrambled over the windowsill and jumped. The impact knocked the air from my lungs. I twisted my ankle, pain shooting up my leg, but adrenaline drowned it out. I got up and ran, limping, away from the building, into the dark courtyards. I ran until my lungs burned. Only when I reached a brightly lit avenue, among a few passing cars, did I allow myself to stop. I looked at my hands. The fingers that had touched the key were black. Not with dirt. The skin on my fingertips had turned gray, dry, and brittle, like old paper. I never returned to that apartment. I hired a company to remove my belongings, but asked them not to enter the bedroom. I told them there was mold. They brought me my boxes. Half my things were ruined, coated in a layer of black, greasy dust that wouldn't wash out. I never recovered the keys. The realtor called, cursed at me, threatened court over the broken window. I just transferred the money for repairs and blocked his number. But do you know what frightens me the most? A week ago, I woke up in my new rented apartment on the other side of the city. I went to the bathroom to wash my face. The mirror was fogged from my girlfriend's shower. On the fogged glass, right behind my reflection, was a small, barely visible house. And beside it, a long, thin figure. I wiped it away with my hand. But under my fingers, I felt not the moisture of condensation. I felt dry, rough graphite. They didn't stay in that house. They don't travel through walls. They travel through our attention. The moment you see them, you become their canvas. I woke to a sound that could not be mistaken for anything else. It was a heavy, vibrating scrape of wood against parquet, the kind of sound that makes your teeth ache. I lay in the darkness, paralyzed with fear, listening as the enormous oak wardrobe I had pushed to the opposite wall during the day and blocked with boxes of books slowly, centimeter by centimeter, crawled back toward that cursed niche. Then the scraping stopped. And from the darkness, from the corner where the wardrobe stood, came a wet, sucking breath. Many would say it was sleep paralysis or toxic mold exposure. I thought so myself for the first 3 days. But I'm not writing this to be diagnosed. I'm writing this as a warning. If you move into an old house and see furniture that seems fused to its place, don't touch it. Some things are not there for decoration. They are there to block something. Get comfortable. And for God's sake, check whether your wardrobe is locked. The apartment was perfect. Too perfect for its price. An old building, 3.5-meter ceilings, pre-revolutionary plasterwork, and thick brick walls that swallowed the noise of the city. The realtor, a nervous man with darting eyes, said the previous owners had left the country in a hurry and abandoned almost all their furniture. A bonus, he said, tapping his finger against the polished surface of the massive wardrobe in the bedroom. Antique. Oak. They don't make them like this anymore. Impossible to lift, a shame to take apart. Let it stay. I signed the papers without reading them. I was 30, fresh from a brutal divorce, and I wanted to start over somewhere quiet. The silence here was different. Dense. When I closed the heavy front door behind the realtor and found myself alone, it felt as though the apartment held its breath. The air smelled of old paper, dry dust, and something faintly sweet, like wilted flowers left too long in stagnant water. For the first week I did what all new tenants do, stripped old wallpaper and planned rearrangements. The bedroom was huge, but that wardrobe. It stood against the far wall, dark and bulky, like a giant sarcophagus. Its carved legs had sunk into the lacquered parquet, and its doors were shut with an old mortise lock whose key I never found. It irritated me. It occupied the best wall, the perfect place for a bed. And it radiated cold. Even when the radiators blasted full heat, the temperature around that oak monster dropped by several degrees. On Saturday morning I decided I'd had enough. I drank strong coffee, put on work gloves, and armed myself with a crowbar. Intuition is a strange thing. When I wedged the crowbar under the wardrobe's base, a chill ran down my spine. Not from a draft. It was a raw, animal sense of danger, like standing at the edge of a cliff about to jump. An inner voice whispered, "Leave it. Don't touch it. This is the load-bearing structure of your piece." I brushed the feeling off. I was a grown man, an engineer. I wasn't going to be afraid of furniture. The wardrobe resisted. There was a loud crack, as if the wood screamed in pain, and the heavy mass shifted a couple of centimeters. I leaned in with my full weight. Slowly, groaning, carving deep gouges into the parquet, it crawled sideways. It took half an hour to move it a single meter. I was drenched in sweat, my muscles burning. But when I finally straightened up and looked at the wall it had revealed, the triumph vanished instantly. There was no wallpaper behind it. There was a niche. A deep, dark recess in the wall, roughly 1 by 2 meters. It didn't look architectural. The edges were uneven, the plaster crumbling away to reveal old red brick beneath. But the worst part was the smell. The moment the wardrobe moved, the room filled with stench. That same sweet rot I'd noticed during the viewing, now concentrated and thick. The smell of damp earth, mold, and something meaty, spoiled. I clamped my sleeve over my nose and shone my phone's flashlight inside. The niche was empty. About half a meter deep. On the back wall, coated in black growth that looked like fungus, were strange scratches. Long, vertical marks. As if someone had clawed at the wall with nails, or talons. "Great," I muttered, though my voice sounded dull and uncertain. "Just an old vent or a sealed passage. I'll plaster it up and forget it." I decided to leave the wardrobe where it was so the niche could dry out. I opened the window wide to air out the smell and went to the kitchen. All evening I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a mistake. That I'd lifted the lid on Pandora's box. The first night I woke around 3. The room was cold despite the closed window. I lay on a mattress thrown directly on the floor, the bed hadn't arrived yet, staring at the ceiling. Silence. That dense silence of an old building. Then I heard it. A sound so quiet it was barely there. A rustling. Like dry skin rubbing against stone. It came from the corner with the niche. I propped myself up on my elbows, squinting into the darkness. The streetlight outside cast enough glow to outline the furniture. The wardrobe stood where I'd left it, a meter from the wall. The black mouth of the niche gaped like an open throat. "Who's there?" I asked. Stupid. Like something from a cheap horror movie. Silence. Only my heart pounding in my ears. I lay back down, telling myself it was mice. Old house, wooden floors, mice were normal. I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. The sleep was thick and restless. I dreamed I was suffocating, that sacks of wet earth were piled on my chest. The alarm woke me. My head was splitting. I sat up on the mattress, rubbing my temples, and glanced at the corner. I froze. The cup of water in my hand slipped and shattered on the floor, but I didn't even flinch. The wardrobe was back in place. Pressed flush against the wall, sealing the niche. Exactly as it had stood the morning before. The grooves I'd gouged into the parquet disappeared beneath its base. I stood on trembling legs and walked closer. Touched the wood. Cold. Solid. Motionless. "That's impossible," I whispered. The wardrobe weighed at least 200 kilos. I'd nearly wrecked my back moving it. No one could have slid it back silently. No one could have entered my locked apartment. Maybe I was sleepwalking. Maybe I'd done it myself, somehow restoring everything in my sleep. I grabbed the edge again. This time it was even harder to move, as if it were resisting. I braced my feet, growling with effort. 1 centimeter. 2. 10. When I opened the niche again, the smell hit me with renewed force. Sharper now. Acidic. I looked inside. Something lay on the floor of the recess, in the layer of century-old dust. It hadn't been there before. I shone the flashlight. A clump of hair. Tangled, filthy, grayish, like what you pull from a clogged shower drain. But dry. I shuddered. I kicked it, and it crumbled into dust. Enough, I said aloud. I'm sealing this crap today. I didn't have bricks, but I had plywood and expanding foam. I decided to block the niche temporarily and move the wardrobe to the opposite wall, far away. I worked until evening. Screwed the plywood directly into the wall with anchors, flooded the gaps with foam. I dragged the wardrobe into the far corner of the room and barricaded it with boxes so it definitely wouldn't wander if I sleepwalked again. That night I took sleeping pills. I needed rest. The pills didn't help. Or rather, they shut down my mind, but my body still reacted to danger. I woke suddenly, jolted awake like I'd been shocked. The room wasn't pitch black. Streetlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting long shadows. The sound. Scraping. Slow. Rhythmic. I lay with my back to the wall, afraid to move. The sound wasn't coming from the niche. It was coming from where I'd put the wardrobe. I slowly turned my head. The wardrobe was moving. I wasn't losing my mind. I saw it with my own eyes. The massive oak bulk crawled across the floor. The boxes of books bracing it were crushed or shoved aside as if made of foam. It didn't roll. It lurched, jerk by jerk, as though something invisible and immensely strong were pushing from inside, or pulling it toward itself. It crossed the room, back toward the niche. I wanted to jump up, scream, run. But fear isn't flight. Real fear is paralysis. I lay under the blanket, curled into myself, watching. The wardrobe slid past my mattress. I felt a breath of cold air and that same rotten stench. I thought I heard heavy breathing. Not mine. It came from the wardrobe itself. It reached the wall with the boarded-up niche. Thudded against it. Then began to shimmy, adjusting itself until it stood perfectly flush, sealing the plywood. The moment it settled, the room fell silent. I lay there until dawn. With the first light, the paralysis broke. I jumped up, grabbed my keys and phone, and fled the apartment. I spent the day in a park, then in a cafe. I Googled. Moving furniture. Poltergeist. History of the house on Sadovia Street. I found a local history forum. One thread discussed my building. A post from 2011 caught my eye. In apartment 7, in the 90s, there lived an old woman who was into something shady. Neighbors complained about the smell. When she died, they broke in. They found her in the wardrobe. She'd been sitting there dead for 2 weeks. The strangest part, the wardrobe was nailed shut from the inside. And behind it they found a hole into the neighboring apartment, but the neighbors swore they had a solid wall there. Nailed shut from the inside. I returned after dark. I couldn't just abandon everything. This was my apartment. My money. My life. Anger began to push fear aside. I decided to end it. I bought a powerful construction floodlight, an axe, and chains. In the bedroom, the wardrobe stood like a sentry. The stench of rot was unbearable now, soaked into my clothes. I switched on the floodlight, drowning the room in blinding white. "Come on," I hissed. "Show yourself." I stepped closer. This time I didn't try to move it. I looked at the keyhole. Black, viscous slime was seeping from it, dripping onto the parquet. I swung the axe and struck the door. The wood was old but tough. The axe stuck. I yanked it free. A blast of icy wind rushed out, and the floodlight flickered. Something slammed from inside. Hard. The doors bulged outward. I struck again, splitting the panel. Splinters flew. Through the hole I saw darkness, but not the darkness of an empty wardrobe. There was no back wall inside. And the plywood I'd sealed the niche with was gone. There was a passage. A tunnel stretching far deeper than the thickness of the wall should allow. And from that tunnel, a face stared back at me. It was pale as dough and swollen. Its eyes were sewn shut with coarse thread. And its mouth was open in an impossibly wide, silent scream. But the worst part wasn't the face. The worst part was that the creature was gripping the edges of the opening with its hands. Long, multi-jointed fingers tipped with black nails. And it was pulling. It wasn't pulling itself out. It was pulling the wardrobe toward itself. Trying to close itself in. I understood in an instant. The wardrobe wasn't returning to attack me. It returned because it didn't want light. It wanted to be sealed. It wanted to rot in darkness. And I had destroyed its shelter. The creature jerked, and its arm shot through the hole. Cold, slick fingers clamped around my wrist. The grip was iron. The cold burned like liquid nitrogen. I screamed and lunged backward, bracing my foot against the wardrobe base. It hissed, a sound like steam venting from a ruptured pipe. It dragged me toward itself, into the wardrobe, into that endless tunnel of decay. I felt my feet lifting off the floor. No! I roared, hacking at the arm with the axe. The blade sank into flesh without a sound, like into a rotten pumpkin. Black slime sprayed into my face, blinding me. The grip loosened. I fell onto my back, scrambling away, choking, wiping my eyes. The wardrobe shook. The doors began to burst open under pressure from within. I saw other limbs forcing their way out, pale, wet, writhing. It was coming out. I don't remember running into the hallway. I only remember grabbing the heavy chest of drawers from the entryway and dragging it back with inhuman strength. The thing was halfway out of the wardrobe now, a mass of flesh barely resembling a human, fused with some kind of fungal growth. I tipped the chest onto it, pinning it against the wardrobe. There was a wet crunch. The creature shrieked, a sound so high-pitched a capillary burst in my nose. I grabbed the chains. Wrapped them around the wardrobe handles, threaded them through the legs of the chest, building a makeshift barrier. I moved in a frenzy, feeling no pain, no fear, only raw survival. The creature thrashed, trying to shove the barricade aside. The wardrobe jumped and slammed against the floor. But I was already running to the kitchen for a hammer and long nails. I nailed the bedroom door shut. Drove nails through the frame every 5 centimeters. I shoved the refrigerator against it. I barricaded the apartment entrance with every piece of furniture in the hall. Then I left. Wearing what I had, bloodied axe in hand, it was night, and I dumped it in a courtyard trash bin. I sold the apartment a month later. Remotely. At a massive discount. I told the buyers it needed major repairs and that one room's door was jammed. I didn't take a single thing with me. Now I live in a new building. 16th floor. Minimalism. No wardrobes. Just open clothing racks and clear plastic containers. But sometimes, at night, when the neighbors upstairs move furniture, that sound. Wood scraping against concrete. Cold sweat breaks over me. I lie there and think about the new owners. A young couple. They were probably thrilled by the low price. They've probably already moved the refrigerator away from the bedroom door. They've probably picked up a crowbar to pry open the nailed door. And when they go in, they'll see the wardrobe. An old, beautiful oak wardrobe. And they'll want to move it. Because it's not standing right. Don't repeat my mistake. If there's something in your home that feels too heavy, too immovable, let it be. Some doors must remain closed. Forever.